The worst thing about betrayal isn't the other guy. It's the look on your wife's face when she sees him. Like she's finally been struck by lightning after years of walking around just waiting to be zapped into something new and exciting. I'd never been good at science, but I understood that kind of electricity. The kind that could turn your whole world into ash. Let's rewind a bit. 26 years. That's a solid chunk of life, enough for most couples to build a fortress against the storms of the world. At least, that's what I thought Tracy and I had done. Sure, stuff wore down over time, the passion wasn't on full blast like those honeymoon years, but we had something better. I trusted her like I trusted my own 2 feet. We had a comfy house, a nice enough retirement fund, Morgan grown and happily married, zero drama. Boring, maybe to some, but I wouldn't trade it. Then we went to that damn party. Flashback to the morning before. I'm making my usual coffee, Trass is humming along to some oldie song on the radio, and I'm thinking, damn, I got lucky. Corny as hell, I know. But hey, sometimes a guy just needs a minute to count his blessings, right? She catches me grinning like an idiot. What? She laughs. You finally realize your wife's still got it. I wink and pull her close. Never needed a reminder. Gorgeous. We kiss, a good long one, and I head off to work, feeling like I could tackle the world. Cut to later that day, at Scott and Wendy's annual bash. People milling about, the usual backyard barbecue chaos. And then boom, it hits me something's off. Not that gut punch and panic kind of off, more like the air feels a few degrees colder. I look around, but can't shake it. I find Tracy chatting with some ladies, try to catch her eye. That's when I see him. Mr. Eurochic himself, standing there like a lost tourist, while my wife looks across the yard at him, and her whole damn face transforms. Eyes go wide, cheeks flush, like she's finally found the thing she'd never realized was missing. At that exact moment, my heart starts playing a drum solo I was definitely not prepared for. For the next hour, I'm on autopilot, introducing myself to this Charles dude, making polite conversation, all the while observing Tracy. She's glued to his side, those flirty little smiles she used to reserve for me. Each giggle, every time their hands brush, it's a white hot knife to the gut. I'm not the jealous type, never have been. But this isn't jealousy. It's watching your world catch fire and knowing you can't stop it. The worst part? The innocent, hand on the shoulder touch as they walked past me. I wasn't an idiot, I knew what that meant. The rage boiled up so fast I was surprised I didn't start steaming. I grabbed this Charles jerk by the wrist. Keep your hands off my wife. Everyone froze, Tracy gasped, and I had that moment of clarity where you realize you're about to make things 10 times worse. Before I could say another word, though, they were just gone. You could say I wasn't the best husband that night. My words came out sharp, each one meant to cut as deep as the betrayal I felt. Tracy, for her part, didn't bother defending herself. She'd been caught red-handed, and some small part of her seemed ashamed. Yet, even with the guilt swirling in her eyes, there was a hardness too. A flicker of defiance that made my stomach drop. But I'll back up, rewind to the disappearing act. It was like a bad magic trick. 1 second there, the next, poof. I scanned the backyard, the house, even the damn street, but nothing. Part of me, some pathetic, hopeful sliver, kept thinking, she'll be back, she's got to explain, it was the drinks, the excitement. Pathetic, really. Home alone was a fresh kind of torture. Usually, I'd unwind with a game on TV, a beer, maybe Tracy, and I would talk about our days. That night, the silence was deafening. I paced around the house like a caged animal. Every time the phone rang, my heart slammed against my ribs, then deflated when it was just another telemarketer. Finally, I dialed her number myself. Voicemail. Over and over. That damn automated voice, soulless and mocking. The night stretched on, a blur of anger and whiskey. Each tick of the clock felt like a hammer blow. It wasn't just the cheating, it was the not knowing. Did they laugh at me? Were they? God, I couldn't even think it. Sleep was out of the question. Instead, my mind ran wild, conjuring images each more painful than the last. When the front door finally rattled open, it was almost a relief. That twisted, desperate kind of relief you feel right before the other shoe drops. Tracy didn't look at me as she walked in. She smelled faintly of smoke and some perfume I'd never bought her. "Where the hell have you been?" My voice came out raspy, barely above a whisper. She shrugged. "Out. That was it. Just out." It took every ounce of strength to not just lose it right there. With him, my voice finally rose, cracking with anger. "Then," she said it. The words I knew were coming, yet they still hit like a punch to the gut. "Greg, I'm in love with Charles." The world narrowed down to her face, the set of her jaw, the coldness in her voice. My wife, the woman I thought knew me better than anyone, was a total stranger. All I could do was choke out, "Get out." I couldn't stay in the same room as her. Not for one more second. The next few days were a blur. Filing for divorce, going through the motions at work, the pitying looks from people who'd heard the gossip. Worst part was facing Morgan, having to explain what her mother had done. She took it harder than I expected, cursing Tracy, crying. She was a grown woman, but in moments like that, all I saw was my little girl, heartbroken. The hardest part, the absolute worst, was the one-on-one with Charles. Seething with rage, I tracked him down at the college. The confrontation was, well, it wasn't pretty. He tried to charm his way out of it, the condescending smiles, the smooth talk. "Greg, there's no need to be hostile." I saw right through it, saw the weakness under the polished surface. He thought he had won. That's what fueled my fist as it connected with his smug jaw. It wasn't a solution. It didn't change what Tracy had done, but damn, did it feel good. What had changed things? The divorce papers. It was the final nail in the coffin of our perfect life. Tracy didn't fight me on it, didn't cry or make a scene. The woman I'd married would have at least defended something. This Tracy was cold and efficient, already moved on to her new adventure. I signed the papers with shaking hands, knowing it was the last page of a chapter one desperately wanted to rip out and burn. The first day back at the house felt like walking through a ghost town. Our house, her house now. I had to keep reminding myself. Even the air felt heavy, saturated with the memory of Trass's laughter, our inside jokes, 26 years of shared existence just gone. It wasn't even about the stuff, the furniture, the artwork, whatever. It was the absence that cut me deepest. I kept expecting to find her in the kitchen, humming along to the radio while making lunch, or curled up on the sofa with that old romance novel she loved. Instead, it was silence, punctuated by the empty echo of my own footsteps. My hands shook as I packed my clothes, each t-shirt and pair of jeans a stark reminder that I was leaving my old life behind. Thank God for Morgan. She'd always been the best part of me and Tracy combined. In the midst of my own self-pity, she was the one who chivied me along. "Pops, let's get this over with. You can crash at my place until you find somewhere new." She had that same no-nonsense determination her mother once had, softened with a love and support that pierced through my despair. There was another bright spot. A woman named Sarah from my accounting firm. We'd worked together for years, always friendly in that office kind of way. After word got out about Tracy, Sarah had quietly reached out. A few careful emails, a heartfelt lunch where she listened more than she spoke. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but knowing someone had my back mattered more than I'd expected. Then, of course, there was Wendy. I don't think the woman ever slept, not with all that energy dedicated to neighborhood gossip and meddling in other people's lives. She showed up on my doorstep with a casserole and more guilt than a Catholic confessional. I wanted to slam the door in her face, but it wasn't her fault Tracy had a wandering eye. Wendy's apologies were endless, her attempts to fix things ranging from downright annoying to embarrassingly comical. I appreciated the thought, sort of, but mostly wanted to be left alone to lick my wounds. The inevitable grocery store encounter happened about a week later. There she was, in aisle 5, looking completely exhausted. I probably looked a mess myself, hadn't shaved in days. Her eyes widened when she saw me, that mix of guilt and defiance flashing across her face. I almost turned and walked away, but some part of me wanted her to squirm, even just a little. "Tracy," I said, not unkindly, just flat. "Greg," she managed a tight smile. "So, how are you?" The end of the question hung in the air, the awkwardness so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. I wanted to scream at her, to ask how she could do this. I settled for, "Fine." "And you?" The words tasted like sawdust in my mouth. Before she could answer, a voice interrupted, "Mommy." My heart plummeted. Out of nowhere, a toddler came running around the corner, barreling straight for Tracy. He was all blonde hair and dimpled knees, and in that moment, it was like staring into a cruel mirror image. That easily could have been my grandson, if things had turned out differently. Tracy looked near panic. "Charles Jr., honey, Mommy's just." Her explanation floundered, drowned out by shock. My mind was a tangled mess. Of course, Charles had a kid. Wait, they'd named him after himself? What kind of egotistical jackass does that? And Tracy, seeing her cradling that child, it triggered something raw and primal, a fury that simmered dangerously close to the surface. "Greg, she tried again, but I cut her off." "Nice kid," I managed to grit out the words, then turned and walked away. It took everything in me not to look back, but the image of Tracy, with that child in her arms, was seared into my brain. A brutal reminder of everything I'd lost and the family I might have had. The annual 4th of July party was the last thing I needed. But it was tradition. Everyone in the neighborhood would be there, and hiding out under a rock seemed cowardly, even to me. Besides, a few beers, the distraction of loud music and friendly chatter. Maybe it'd numb the ache that had settled deep in my bones. Honestly, I wasn't doing half bad for the first hour or so. The volleyball tournament always hyped me up, a throwback to those high school glory days. Our team was on a roll, spiking, blocking, laughing. The crowd cheered. Wendy even brought me another beer. I hadn't felt that sense of pure, uncomplicated joy in a long time. Then, like a switch had been flipped, it all went to hell. I spotted her across the yard, sitting alone, nursing a drink, her shoulders slumped. It wasn't the Tracy I knew. Sure, the body was the same, those long legs that had first caught my eye all those years ago. But the vibrant, teasing spark was gone from her eyes. They held a weariness, a sadness I'd never seen before. A part of me, a stupid, weak part, wanted to cross the lawn, sit beside her, offer. What? Comfort? Reassurance? The thought was absurd, yet something in me wouldn't let her sit there forlorn, drowning in a crowd of people who didn't see the real her. Or maybe didn't even care. Just then, he appeared. Charles, sauntering across the lawn like he owned the damn place, a cocky smirk on his face. He draped a possessive arm over Tressa's shoulders, leaned down to whisper something in her ear. I didn't know if it was anger or pity I felt more strongly. It was a toxic cocktail either way. My attention was ripped away by a commotion on the other side of the yard. It was Marilyn Jansen, the pretty, always smiling wife of my volleyball teammate, Troy. But her smile wasn't in evidence. Instead, she was staring daggers at Charles, her face flushed with fury. In a flash of sick realization, it all clicked. Charles wasn't just comforting a sad Tracy, he was hitting on another woman, right in front of her. It was a sick echo of what he'd done to me. I was rooted to the spot, a spectator in a twisted morality play that was about to explode. Troy must have sensed the tension because he was suddenly striding across the lawn, purpose in every step. Marilyn was hot on his heels, spilling out her accusations and tears. Charles tried to smooth talk his way out of it, but Troy wasn't having it. The next part happened in a blur. A shove, a shout, and then the sickening crack of bone. Charles crumpled to the ground, clutching his arm. Chaos ensued, shrieks, people jumping back, that frantic energy a crowd gets when the veneer of politeness cracks and raw human ugliness is on display. I watched it unfold, strangely detached, a part of me feeling a twisted satisfaction seeing the bastard get his comeuppance. And through it all, there was Tracy, her face a mask of shock, then something like disgust as she watched Charles try and plead his innocence. The police arrived, paramedics swarmed over the injured Frenchman, and the party screeched to a halt. Later, in the uneasy aftermath, it was Tracy who approached me. "Greg, I need a ride to the hospital." "Charles's arm, it's bad." She barely managed to get the words out, a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. Everything in me screamed to walk away, leave her to her mess. But some deep-rooted sense of, not decency, that was gone, but a twisted kind of loyalty made me nod. We drove to the hospital in silence. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, with the ghosts of who we used to be. Did I hate her? At that moment, with the smell of antiseptic filling the air, Charles groaning on a gurney. No, I couldn't muster hate. Just a deep well of sadness and the faintest glimmer of something that might, in time, resemble forgiveness. But that was a road far longer than the one home from the ER. Hospitals have all the comfort and charm of a DMV on a Monday morning. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the air crackled with nervous energy, and the smell of bleach made me nauseous. I found a hard plastic chair and slumped into it, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. Surprisingly, Tracy sat down next to me instead of pacing the hall like a caged tiger. For what felt like the first time in forever, we weren't staring daggers at each other. It was just a shared quiet, a forced intimacy born out of waiting. He's getting surgery, Tracy said flatly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. They going to fix him up, huh? I muttered, not sure what to say. A part of me hoped the smug bastard might feel a fraction of the pain he'd cause. Then, Tracy said the unthinkable. Greg, I'm so sorry. My head snapped up. Had I hurt her right? The Tracy I knew, even the heartbroken version, didn't apologize easily. It's all falling apart, Charles. He's not what I thought. Her voice cracked, and for a moment, the old Tracy flickered, raw and vulnerable. I made such a terrible mistake. I didn't know what to say. Was this genuine remorse, or was the fantasy unraveling, forcing a reality check? We spent the rest of the night in a strange limbo. Hours passed, punctuated by updates on Charles's surgery. Finally, around dawn, Tracy was allowed to see him briefly. I offered to drive her home, half expecting her to refuse. Instead, she turned those weary blue eyes on me. Thanks. I could use the company. The drive was quiet but not tense. In the soft, pre-dawn light, Tracy looked every bit her age, the lines of worry and exhaustion etched on a face I once knew so well. A flicker of something, not quite pity but close, sparked inside me. When we pulled up to her house, I didn't make a move to leave. She looked at me expectantly. A part of me wanted to scream at her, to ask how she could have done this to us. But what purpose did it serve? Words couldn't rewind the clock. Tracy, I started, my voice hoarse. I still care about you. It doesn't go away that easy. The confession hung in the air between us. Oh, Greg. She started, then paused. Her fingers brushed against mine, the touch fleeting, almost accidental. But for a split second, a surge of something passed between us. Hope. Connection? I wasn't sure. With a final squeeze of my hand, she was gone. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the house, so familiar, yet tinged with a haunting sadness. It wasn't until I was back home, surrounded by unpacked boxes and half-empty closets, that I made the decision. I dug out Officer McDonald's business card, staring at the name. Kathleen. A few years ago, we'd shared a few flirty emails during a case overlap. Nothing happened. It was all harmless. But now I needed someone, outside of this mess. Screw it, I muttered and reached for my phone. My finger hovered over the dial button. Was this a rebound, an attempt to numb the pain? Or could there be a new chapter written after all, one that wasn't defined by Tracy, but by the man I was becoming? It was time to take a step forward, even if I wasn't entirely sure where the path would lead. Kathleen McDonald turned out to be pretty much as I remembered, smart, funny, and, yeah, undeniably attractive. Our first date was at that little Italian place in town, the kind with checkered tablecloths and wine served in mismatched tumblers. I needed that old-school comfort against the chaotic backdrop of my life. We laughed a lot. That's the thing about shared trauma, it can bond you in ways shiny first dates can't. We both had been through the ringer of failed relationships, and it felt oddly liberating to admit our wounds, to joke about the bad decisions we'd both made. But, of course, Tracy was the elephant in the room. No matter how good the wine or how sparkling Kathleen's eyes were, I couldn't escape the memory of what I had lost. And that damn guilt gnawed at me. Was I using this amazing woman to forget what Tracy had done? Did Kathleen deserve that, even if it was subconscious on my part? The date ended with a hesitant goodnight kiss on the cheek. I promised to call, I meant to, but something held me back. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of quiet dinners with Morgan, tentative moves to start my own accounting business, and a persistent niggling in the back of my mind. Something wasn't right with the Charles situation. See, I'm the kind of guy who likes to know things, to tie up loose ends. It's great when balancing the books, but lousy when those books are the messy ledger of your wife having an affair. So, I did a little digging. Nothing sinister, just a few well-placed internet searches. Turns out Charles hadn't quite been the shining academic star Tracy had believed. His tenure at various schools had always been short-lived, the online whispers hinting at financial irregularities and something less savory about his attitude toward female students. I'd never been the confrontational type, but a part of me wanted Tracy to know what Charles really was. Maybe it was petty, maybe it was a twisted sort of concern. Either way, I sent her a carefully worded email, just links to the articles, no accusations, just the facts to let her draw her own conclusions. The fallout was swift and intense. One evening I found her standing on my doorstep, face flushed in a mix of anger and, surprisingly, shame. "How could you?" she hissed, but it lacked the usual Tracy fire. "He's not who you thought, Tracy." I kept my voice calm, a stark contrast to her agitation. It all spilled out then. The mounting debts, the constant arguments behind closed doors, Charles's controlling ways twisting that initial infatuation into something dark and suffocating. With a sob, she sank onto my porch step, head in her hands. Had I just given her the excuse she needed to crawl back to me? Just then, the front door swung open and there stood Morgan, her resemblance to Tracy at that age striking. "Mom, what are you doing here? You can't?" She spotted me and her expression hardened. "Is this why you moved out? You knew all along, didn't you?" The accusation stung, but what came next was even worse. Morgan laid into her mother with a ferocity that mirrored my own rage when the betrayal was fresh. But unlike me, there was no room for forgiveness in Morgan's eyes. The two women I loved most in the world were at each other's throats, and it was all because of choices Tracy had made. When they finally stormed off, each retreating to their separate lives, I realized my family was irrevocably broken. And while I wanted to soothe Morgan, to tell her Tracy was still her mother despite everything, a part of me understood her anger. I'd felt it too. In the awkward days that followed, there was one bright spot. Wendy, of all people. She showed up with a tray of brownies and an unexpectedly insightful observation. "You're still hung up on her, aren't you?" It wasn't a question. Wendy knew me too damn well for that. I don't know. I sighed. Sometimes I hate her. Sometimes I just feel bad for her. And yeah, there's still. I trailed off, unable to define the tangle of emotions towards the woman I'd once planned to grow old with. Wendy nodded sagely. "Well, that's love for you. Messy, complicated, but maybe it's time for a different kind of love, hmm? That Irish lass seems like a good egg." She gave me a wink and bustled off. It was annoying, it was meddling, but damn it if she wasn't right. You know those picture-perfect autumn Sundays they put on calendars? Crisp air, leaves crunching underfoot, kids laughing as they chase squirrels in the park. That's where fate decided to deal me another twist in the whole Tracy saga. I'd taken a long walk, hoping to clear my head. The Kathleen thing was promising, but I was still carrying way too much emotional baggage for a light-hearted romance. I found myself aimlessly circling the park, watching kids squeal with delight on the swings when I spotted a familiar blonde ponytail and heard a child's infectious giggle. Tracy and little Charles Jr. She was kneeling next to him, wiping ice cream from his chin, her expression softer than I'd seen in ages. I wanted to turn and vanish into the trees, but it was too late. Her eyes found mine, widening in surprise. "Greg," she started, then looked flustered. "Charles Jr., this is Mr. Gregerson. We were neighbors." Was that a flicker of guilt on her face? or just the awkwardness of an unexpected encounter. The kid grinned, chocolate smeared around his mouth. "Hi, Mr. Gregerson." He waved a sticky hand at me. I found myself smiling back, despite everything. "Hey there, buddy. You got yourself some ice cream." Before I could overthink it, I was squatting down next to him, showing him a goofy trick making a coin disappear. His giggle was like music. I almost forgot who his mother was. The weight of the last year momentarily lifted. When they left a while later, Tracy hesitated. "Look, thanks for being nice to him." "Sure." I manage, thrown off balance by this flash of normalcy. The next few days were a blur of confusion. What the hell was I supposed to with those few stolen moments of easy warmth? And then, the inevitable happened. Tracy called. I steeled myself, half expecting an apology, recriminations, I wasn't sure. Instead, her voice was strained. "Greg, I don't know who else to turn to. Would you come over?" Her words tumbled out in a rush, with a hint of desperation. I almost said no, should have said no, but damn it, I'd spent half my life looking after her, and that instinct was tough to break, no matter how much she'd hurt me. The second I stepped into that house, I knew something was very wrong. It wasn't the mess. The place was always a disaster zone since Charles moved in. It was the tension, thick as smog, hanging in the air. Tracy looked gaunt. A tremor ran through her hand as she clutched a glass of wine. Charles was worse. Gaunt was the polished charm he displayed in public. He lounged on the couch, a sneer plastered across his face as he watched some dumb sports game. Every time he looked at Tracy, there was a coldness in his eyes that made my skin crawl. His words dripped with condescension, thinly veiled insults masked as jokes. It went on like this for the whole agonizing meal. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "That's some mighty fine cooking, Tracy." I said it louder than necessary, aiming a glare at Charles. Tracy gave a grateful half-smile, the old spark briefly reigniting. He scoffed, "It's edible. Could use more salt." His tone was casual cruelty. That did it. Suddenly, I wasn't just Tracis' betrayed ex. I was a guy who hated seeing a woman bullied, especially one I used to care about. Before I thought it through, I was on my feet. "Listen, you arrogant prick." I started, but then the phone rang. The call was short, just a few hushed words from Tracy. When she hung up, her face was ashen. "Charles Jr., it's the daycare. There's been an accident. We need to go." In a daze, we all piled into the car. On the drive, I tried to offer comfort. When we arrived, everything fell away except raw fear. Charles Jr. was scraped up. A bad fall at the playground was luckily more painful than serious. Seeing them together, Tracy trembling as she clutched her child, Charles hovering with forced concern, I realized something fundamental had shifted. We were back at the hospital a few hours later. Charles had vanished. "Important business," he'd muttered. As we waited for the doctor, Tracy turned to me with tears brimming in her eyes. "Greg, he's going to leave me," he said. He said if it wasn't for the kid, she didn't need to finish the sentence. In the hours that followed, it was like falling into a well-worn rhythm. We comforted a scared little boy, navigated medical red tape. It was the kind of crisis that used to bind Tracy and me together. Except, I was on the outside now. Seeing her like this, vulnerable but with a quiet strength, tore me apart. Should I hate her or protect her? Was it even my place anymore? Late that night, she called again. This time, her voice was barely a whisper, laced with fear. "Greg. It's getting bad. Please, can you come?" I didn't even hesitate. I got to Tracis' place in record time, heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Part of me knew rushing back into that tangled mess was a bad idea. But when a woman, any woman, let alone Tracy, sounds terrified on the phone, a man reacts. The front door was ajar. Inside, the house was dimly lit, the usual domestic chaos magnified by a strange air of menace. Tracy was nowhere to be seen. "Charles," I called tentatively. I regretted it as soon as the words were out. He emerged from the kitchen, whiskey glass in hand, a scowl replacing his usual smug smirk. "Well, look who it is. Mr. Fix-It, come to save the day?" "Charles, whatever problems you two have, I tried to keep my voice steady, but a flicker of something in his eyes made me uneasy. Problems? You have no idea, Greg. His voice slurred slightly. The woman's a leech, draining the life out of me. Should have listened to my friends. Warned me about American gold diggers. His words were poison arrows, and I had a sinking feeling they hit their mark. That old rage boiled up, fueled by the fear for Tracy. Before I could think, I lunged forward, knocking the glass from his hand. He stumbled back, surprise giving way to fury. You son of a. That's when the doorbell rang. An odd interruption to a brewing fight, but somehow jarring enough to give us both pause. Expecting someone, princess? Charles snarled, moving towards the door. He yanked it open, and surprise flickered across his face. Instead of some scared delivery guy, there stood Troy, Marilyn's husband. The one Charles had screwed over, both literally and figuratively. Hey, Slick, remember me? Troy's voice was low, menacing, and he held a baseball bat loosely in one hand. It was a surreal standoff, fueled by booze and testosterone. The fight was over before it really began. Charles might have talked a good game, but he was all bluster against the raw power of a wronged husband. Troy landed a punch that sent the Frenchman staggering back. I hesitated for a second, then the old neighborhood loyalty won out. It wasn't noble, I just saw an opportunity to land a few good punches, maybe settle an old score. The fight was pure chaos, a blur of flailing limbs and curses. Amidst the madness, I caught sight of Tracy standing in the hallway, her face etched with a mix of horror and satisfaction. Yeah, there was no way I could pretend there weren't a few shreds of dark amusement mixed in with my own fury. The sirens wailed in the distance, a jarring counterpoint to the sounds of our brawl. Relief washed over me, not because I was scared of cops, but because it signaled an end to the insanity. It was Kathleen who stepped through the door first. My heart gave a jolt at seeing her in her uniform, her calm professional expression at odds with the chaos within. Her partner, a no-nonsense older cop named Peterson, took one look at the scene and let out a long, exasperated sigh. I should have retired years ago, he muttered. Tracy, bless her heart, stepped forward. Instead of cowering, her voice was surprisingly strong. Officer, I want to press charges. Domestic violence, harassment. She shot a look at Charles, who was getting his hands cuffed, his eyes full of loathing. The night blurred after that. Statements, paperwork, the look of disgust on Kathleen's face as she took my version of events. Later, as she drove me home, the silence between us was thick. Look, you don't have to explain, Greg, Kathleen said, her voice gentle but firm. I know, but I want to. This, with Tracy, it's messy as hell. Seeing him like that, it felt. I couldn't find the words. It wasn't just vengeance, but a twisted need to feel like I still mattered to her, to fix things somehow. Greg, you're a good man. Maybe too good. She reached out and touched my arm briefly. But getting caught up in her drama again, it's not good for anyone. Including you. As usual, Kathleen was right. The aftermath of Charles's arrest was, well, as expected. Lurid headlines, the whispers around town. Tracy, once the picture of suburban respectability, was now front-page news. We got dragged into endless legal wrangling, depositions, calls from reporters. At some point, I lost count of the number of times Kathleen and I ended up in the same room, discussing the case, trying to make sense of it all. There was an unspoken camaraderie, a shared exhaustion, and the glimmer of something more. Pen_spark. Tracy, I don't know, it got complicated. She never asked for forgiveness, never tried to paint herself as a victim. One afternoon, she showed up at my door, looking worn and small, just handed me an envelope and left without a word. Inside, it was a handwritten note and a final stack of divorce papers. No drama, no excuses, just an unceremonious ending to what had once been my whole world. Maybe it was what we both needed, a clean break, even if the day June returned from China, something was off. The air around her felt colder, her smile didn't reach her eyes, and her words were fewer. I tried to brush it off as jet lag, but deep down I knew something had changed. 2 days later, she asked for the talk. That's when my world started to crumble. She confessed to an emotional affair with someone she met in China. I felt the ground slip beneath my feet. This couldn't be happening, not after 16 years, not to us. In the weeks that followed, I tried everything to change her mind. Late night talks, promises of new beginnings, but it was like talking to a wall. She had made up her mind. She wanted to leave, to go live with this other man in China. Our son and I were just supposed to adjust to this new reality. It was agreed, somewhat amicably, that she would move out. But fate had other plans. Her arrangement to stay at a friend's fell through. So, I did the only thing I thought would help. I moved out, suggesting we treat it as a trial separation. Maybe, just maybe, the distance would bring her back to me. August ended with me moving back into our home. But nothing had changed. June was as determined as ever to leave. She started looking for places to rent, a clear sign she wasn't coming back. Then, out of nowhere, she broke down. She couldn't go through with renting a new place. Her resolve was crumbling. She started drinking more, and I noticed cuts on her arms. She was self-harming. Despite everything, I couldn't leave her like that. I took care of her, and for a brief moment, we reconnected. She even suggested we try again, but first, she had to sort out her mess in China. I was reluctant, but she had already booked her flight. September rolled around, and communication during her China trip was sporadic at best. When I pressed her about the other man, she evaded, saying we'd talk when she got back. Alarm bells were ringing in my head. Then came the call that shattered me. She admitted to a full-blown physical affair. I felt betrayed on a level one didn't know existed. When she returned, I couldn't even look at her. We agreed she needed to move out, but decided to wait until after my planned vacation in November, for our son's sake. During my trip, she found another place, but again couldn't go through with it. The second breakdown hit her harder. She started smoking again, drinking more. Her plan was to get signed off work for 3 months and go back to China. I was beyond caring at this point. Christmas and New Year's passed, and we still hadn't filed for divorce. That's when she hit rock bottom. Self-harming, suicidal, the works. It got worse when I mentioned I met someone over New Year's. She denied it was because of that, but I could tell. Now, she was begging me to take her back. She seemed genuinely remorseful, and a part of me felt relieved at the thought of not having to worry about finances or childcare. But could I really forget the betrayal? Her pleas were constant, her eyes always brimming with tears. She was a shadow of the woman I married, lost in a sea of her own making. But every time I looked at her, I saw the betrayal, the lies. Forgiving her felt like an impossible mountain to climb. I watched as she deteriorated before my eyes. The drinking worsened, the self-harm became more frequent. I was torn between anger and a sense of responsibility. This was the mother of my child, once the love of my life. Yet, she had thrown it all away for a fleeting romance. The final straw came when she had another breakdown. It was worse this time. She was inconsolable, mumbling apologies, her words slurred from alcohol. I realized then that this wasn't just about us anymore. She was a danger to herself. I made arrangements for her to stay with a friend temporarily. She needed help, more than I could give. I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt as I watched her leave, her steps uncertain, her future even more so. The following weeks were a blur. I focused on our son, trying to give him some sense of normalcy amidst the chaos. He was confused, hurt, and I had no answers for him. How do you explain to a child that the person they idolized is no longer the hero they thought they were? Our divorce proceedings began in earnest. It was a painful, drawn-out process, filled with legal jargon and cold, emotionless negotiations. I wanted it over, to close this chapter of our lives and start anew. But fate had one more cruel twist. June's mental health spiraled out of control. She was hospitalized after a severe episode. Sitting in that sterile hospital room, watching her hooked up to machines, a part of me wanted to reach out, to comfort her. But another part of me recoiled, remembering the pain she caused. The divorce was finalized quietly. There was no fanfare, no sense of victory, just a profound sense of loss. I had lost the woman I loved, My son had lost the mother he adored, and in her quest for something more, June had lost everything. As I narrate this story, I realize the lesson isn't just about the consequences of infidelity. It's about the fragility of the human heart, the complexity of emotions, and the irreversible damage that one decision can cause. June's journey from a loving wife to a broken woman is a stark reminder of the ripple effect of our choices. I often wonder if things could have been different, if there was a moment where I could have steered us back on course. But some paths, once taken, lead to destinations from which there is no return. As I rebuild my life with my son, I hold on to the hope that out of the ashes of our broken past, we can rise stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Our story isn't one of happy endings, but it is one of growth, resilience, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Hey everyone, I hope you're as engrossed in this story as I am in sharing it with you. If you're finding this journey as compelling as I do, don't forget to hit that like button down below. It really helps the channel and lets me know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. This way, you won't miss out on the rest of this story or any of the other incredible tales we have lined up. Your support means the world to me, and it's what keeps this channel going. Thanks for being part of our community, and I'll see you in the next video. In the wake of June's first breakdown, something shifted between us. I found myself supporting her through her crisis, our relationship entering a strange, fragile state of closeness. She was vulnerable, and despite everything, I couldn't help but be there for her. As we navigated this confusing time, June dropped a bombshell. She suggested we try again. But there was a catch. She had planned another trip to China. To sort things out, she said. My gut twisted at the thought. Another trip, after everything that had happened? My reservations about her trip were like a gnawing beast in my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. She assured me it was just to end things properly with the other man, but the trust between us was a shattered mirror impossible to fully restore. Then came the days of her trip. Communication was sporadic and cold. I felt like I was talking to a stranger. The person on the other end of those messages wasn't the June I knew. My anxiety ramped up with each passing day of silence. The call that broke me came out of the blue. She admitted to a physical affair. Her words were like daggers, each one a brutal betrayal of our years together. I was shattered, numb with pain. The woman I loved, the mother of my son, had crossed a line we could never uncross. When she returned, the air between us was thick with unspoken words and shattered trust. The decision was made. She needed to move out. We agreed to wait until after my vacation for our son's sake, but it was a temporary band-aid over a gaping wound. In a twist of fate, she found a rental but hesitated at the last minute. It was like watching someone standing at the edge of a cliff, unable to jump. This hesitation led to her second breakdown. I watched as she started smoking again, her stress levels skyrocketing. The woman before me was crumbling under the weight of her decisions. In a desperate attempt to find herself, she announced plans for a longer stay in China. For self-improvement, she said. It was hard to believe anything that came out of her mouth by then. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell her to just go and never come back. But there was another part, a quieter, sadder part, that mourned the loss of the life we had built together. As she prepared for her trip, our house became a silent battlefield, every conversation a potential minefield. We were two strangers, coexisting in a space that once held love, laughter, and dreams. The day she left for China, I felt a complex mix of relief and despair. Relief that the source of my pain was gone, despair at the thought of what our lives had become. I was left alone with my thoughts, my son's confused questions, and the remnants of a life that no longer existed. In her absence, the house felt emptier than ever. I struggled with the daily routine, each task a reminder of her betrayal. I found myself staring at the places she used to sit, the silence deafening in her absence. Her trip dragged on, and the communication gaps grew wider. I was left in the dark, the uncertainty gnawing at me. Every day was a battle, trying to maintain normalcy for our son while inside. I was a storm of emotions. Then, out of nowhere, she called. Her voice was different, strained, as if she was holding back a flood of emotions. She talked about her time in China, how she was trying to find herself again. But her words felt hollow, rehearsed. I could barely respond, the anger and hurt choking my words. Our conversations became a twisted dance, her trying to explain, me trying to understand. But how do you understand betrayal? How do you rationalize the breaking of a sacred bond? The weeks dragged on, each day a test of endurance. I threw myself into work, into caring for our son, anything to keep my mind off her. But at night, when the house was quiet, the reality of our situation would crash over me like a wave. She eventually returned from China, but she was a shadow of the woman I married. Her eyes had lost their sparkle, her laughter replaced by silence. She talked about her experiences, how she had changed. But the gap between us had grown too wide. We agreed to continue with the plan for her to move out. She found another rental, but again hesitated. It was as if she was torn between two worlds, unable to decide where she belonged. Her indecision led to her second major breakdown. I found her one evening, curled up on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The sight of her so broken, so lost, stirred something in me. Despite everything, I couldn't turn my back on her. I helped her up, listened as she poured out her fears and doubts. She was terrified of the future, of being alone. She talked about her regrets, her wish to turn back time. But some things, once broken, can't be mended. As the days passed, her mental state deteriorated. She was a mess of anxiety and depression, smoking like a chimney, her health declining. I watched helplessly as she spiraled further down. In a last-ditch effort to find herself, she announced another longer trip to China. This time, it felt like a final goodbye. She talked about needing space, about healing away from the reminders of her mistakes. The day she left for China, there were no tears, no dramatic goodbyes, just a silent acknowledgement of the end of an era. I watched her walk away, a suitcase in hand, a world of regrets trailing behind her. In her absence, I was left to pick up the pieces. Our son asked about her constantly, his innocent questions like daggers to my heart. I did my best to explain, to reassure him, but how do you explain the inexplicable? The house felt like a mausoleum, a monument to a love that once was. I moved through the days mechanically, each task a reminder of her absence. I found myself avoiding the places she used to frequent, the memories too painful to bear. As the days turned into weeks, the reality of our situation set in. We were no longer a family, just fragments of a life that used to be. I started the process of moving on, of building a new life for me and our son. But the scars of her betrayal ran deep, a constant reminder of the cost of trust broken. The chapter of our life together was closing, a story of love turned to ashes. I focused on our son, on giving him the stability and love he needed. But in the quiet moments, when he was asleep, the weight of our shattered dreams would settle on my shoulders, a heavy, unyielding burden. As I navigated this new reality, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey we had taken. From love to betrayal, from trust to heartbreak. The path we had walked was littered with broken promises and shattered expectations. The finality of her moving out loomed over us, an inevitable end to a chapter we had written together. The day she finally gathered her things, the air was thick with unsaid words. She moved around the house, collecting her belongings, each item a piece of our shared history. I watched from a distance, a spectator in the dismantling of our life. Her movements were slow, hesitant, as if she was trying to memorize every corner, every shadow. When she was done, she stood in the doorway, a suitcase in hand, her eyes searching mine for something, forgiveness, perhaps, or a sign of the love we once shared. But all I could offer was a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the end. She left without a word, the door closing behind her with a soft click, a final punctuation to the sentence of our marriage. In the aftermath of her departure, the house felt emptier than ever. I wandered through the rooms, each one echoing with the ghosts of our past. I found myself touching the things she had left behind, a book, a scarf, as if trying to hold on to a piece of her. But as the days passed, the pain began to dull, the memories fading into the background. I focused on rebuilding, on creating a new life for me and my son. We talked about her sometimes, in quiet moments, remembering the good times, acknowledging the bad. The process of healing was slow, a journey of small steps and big leaps. I learned to forgive, not for her, but for me, for my peace of mind. I learned to let go, to release the anger and the hurt that had held me captive. As I narrate this story, I realize the lessons it holds. The importance of trust, the fragility of love, the strength of forgiveness. Our story may not have had a happy ending, but it taught me the value of resilience, of standing up after being knocked down. And as I move forward, with my son by my side, I hold on to the hope of a better tomorrow, a future built on the lessons of the past. Our story is not one of fairy tales, but of reality, of the highs and lows of love and life. The holidays were a blur of artificial cheer and forced smiles. We hadn't started divorce proceedings yet, a fact that hung over us like a dark cloud. I was done waiting, my indifference a shield against further hurt. Then came the night of her third breakdown. It was worse than before, her sobs cutting through the silent house. She had harmed herself again, her arms a map of her pain. I found her on the bathroom floor, a broken figure lost in her despair. The tension between us escalated when I mentioned meeting someone new. It wasn't serious, just a fleeting connection, but the effect on her was like a lit match to dry grass. Her reaction was a mix of anger, pain, and desperation. Her pleas for another chance became a daily ritual. She was remorseful, her apologies a constant echo in our conversations. But my heart was a fortress, sealed against her words. I was torn between forgiveness and betrayal. Part of me longed for the comfort of the past, the other part recoiled at the thought of forgetting her transgressions. It was a battle waged within the confines of my mind, with no clear victor. Her mental state worsened, the depth of her depression a dark chasm that seemed to have no end. I heard about her struggles from mutual friends, their words painting a picture of a woman on the edge. Her attempts to reconcile became more desperate. She wrote letters, sent texts, left voicemails, each one a plea for redemption. But the scars she had left were too deep, too raw to ignore. The pressure from society to forgive was another burden. Friends, family, even strangers seemed to have an opinion on what I should do. Forgive and forget, they said, as if it were that simple. But how do you forgive the unforgivable? Her emotional pleas spilled out into public. She confronted me at work, at the grocery store, her tears and words an embarrassing spectacle. I felt trapped, her presence a constant reminder of the past I was trying to escape. The bombshell hit without warning. June's infidelity had become the talk of the town. Whispers and stares followed me wherever I went, the weight of public scrutiny heavy on my shoulders. It was a scandal that spread like wildfire, a story feasted upon by gossip-hungry onlookers. In the midst of this chaos, June lost her job. Her behavior, once erratic, had spiraled out of control, and her professional life crumbled under the weight of her personal choices. It was a hard fall from grace for a woman who had once been so respected in her field. Her social circle, once a tight-knit group of friends and confidants, slowly disintegrated. One by one, they distanced themselves, unwilling or unable to stand by her side. It was a painful exodus to watch, each departure a further blow to her already fragile state. Back in China, her family, whom I had come to know and respect over the years, disowned her. The news came in terse messages, filled with shame and disappointment. The cultural stigma, the loss of face, was too much for them to bear. June was now adrift, without the anchor of her family's support. Financial troubles soon followed. Without a job and with dwindling savings, she struggled to keep afloat. The life she had known, filled with comforts and security, was slipping away like sand through her fingers. Amidst all this, I found an unexpected well of support within my own social circle. Friends reached out, offering words of encouragement, their gestures a balm to the raw wounds of betrayal. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there are lights that refuse to be extinguished. June's mental and physical health took a nosedive. The vibrant woman I once knew was now a shell, her body and spirit worn down by the turmoil of her own making. It was a descent that was painful to witness, a stark reminder of how far she had fallen. I struggled with guilt over her condition. Despite everything, she was still the mother of my child, a woman I had once promised to love and cherish. Her decline stirred a complex mix of emotions within me: anger, pity, remorse. In a desperate attempt to salvage some semblance of her former life, June reached out to her affair partner. But it was a bridge burned beyond repair. He wanted nothing to do with her, his rejection a public humiliation that added insult to injury. The rejection hit her hard. She was lost, her last hope of happiness slipping through her fingers. I watched from a distance as she grappled with the harsh reality of her situation, her dreams shattered, her future uncertain. The days turned into weeks, each passing moment a testament to the consequences of her actions. June was a woman unmoored, her life a series of cascading failures. Her attempts to rebuild bridges were met with cold shoulders and closed doors. It was during this time that the affair partner made his stance painfully clear. In a public confrontation that turned heads, he openly rejected and humiliated her. The scene was a spectacle of despair and humiliation, drawing both pity and scorn from onlookers. I witnessed it from afar, the drama unfolding like a scene from a tragic play. There she stood, a figure of defeat, her pleas falling on deaf ears. The man she had risked everything for turned. The storm of our private life had broken into the public domain. The whispers and sideways glances confirmed it. Our once private pain was now community gossip. The infidelity that tore our family apart was no longer just ours to bear. June's world was unraveling faster than a spool of thread. She lost her job amidst the scandal, her erratic behavior the final nail in her professional coffin. Watching from the sidelines, I saw the woman who had once held her head high now reduced to a shadow of her former self. Isolation followed her like a dark cloud. Friends who once filled our home with laughter now crossed the street to avoid her. Her social circle, which had been a source of joy and support, crumbled away, leaving her more alone than ever. Then came the news that hit her like a ton of bricks: her family in China had disowned her. The shame of her actions, magnified by cultural expectations, had severed the ties that bound her to her roots. She was a pariah in her own community, an outcast in her family. Financial struggles soon followed. Without a job and with dwindling savings, June faced the harsh reality of her decisions. The lifestyle she had known, the comforts she had taken for granted, slipped away like sand through her fingers. Amidst her spiraling life, I found an unexpected solace in my own social circle. Friends and colleagues rallied around me, their words a balm to the open wounds of betrayal. It was a stark contrast to June's desolation. Her mental and physical health deteriorated in tandem. The vibrant woman I had married was now a frail figure, her body bearing the brunt of her mental anguish. Guilt gnawed at me for all the pain between us. I never wished her harm. The final blow came when she tried to reconnect with her affair partner, the man for whom she had risked everything. But fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of irony. He rejected her, publicly and mercilessly. The humiliation was complete, a spectacle for all to see. June's life, once so full of promise, had spiraled into chaos. Her health, both mental and physical, was a shadow of what it once was. Watching from a distance, I was torn between relief that it was no longer my circus and a deep-seated guilt for the role I played in her downfall. The news of her attempted reconciliation with the affair partner and his brutal rejection spread like wildfire. People I barely knew approached me with a mix of sympathy and morbid curiosity. The drama of our lives was better than any soap opera, it seemed. June's predicament was a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes could change. She was now a pariah, ostracized by those she once considered friends, abandoned by family, and scorned by her lover. As her estranged husband, I was caught in a whirlwind of emotions. The support from my friends was heartening, but it couldn't completely erase the guilt that lingered in the back of my mind. Was I partly to blame for her current state? Could I have done something different? But the reality was that June's choices had led her down this path. Her decisions, driven by a fleeting passion, had cost her everything. Her job, her reputation, her social standing all gone. I watched as she struggled to come to terms with her new reality. Her attempts to rebuild her life were met with closed doors and turned backs. The community we had once been a part of had turned its back on her, the judgment in their eyes clear as day. Her physical health was the next casualty in this saga. The stress and depression took a visible toll on her, her once vibrant appearance now dull and lifeless. It pained me to see her like this, but I was helpless to do anything. The saga of our broken marriage was a cautionary tale of love, betrayal, and the consequences of our actions. It was a reminder that the choices we make can have far-reaching effects, impacting not just our lives but those around us. As I navigated this new chapter of my life, I was constantly reminded of the tumultuous journey that had brought me here. The support of my friends was a lifeline, but it couldn't erase the memories or the pain. June's descent into despair was a stark contrast to the life we had once envisioned. It was a tragic end to a story that had started with so much promise. Her fall from grace was a painful reminder of how quickly life could change, how the choices we make can lead us down paths we never intended to walk. The community's reaction to our saga was a mix of pity, scorn, and a morbid fascination. I was the wronged husband, the victim of a wayward wife's actions. But the sympathy felt hollow, a reminder of the loss we had both suffered. In the end, our story was one of lost love, broken promises, and the consequences of betrayal. It was a tale that resonated with many, a cautionary reminder of the fragility of relationships and the destructive power of infidelity. As I rebuilt my life, piece by piece, I often wondered about June. Where was she now? How was she coping with the aftermath of her decisions? The once vibrant, confident woman I had married was now a ghost, a reminder of a past life that was no longer mine. The journey we had embarked on together had ended in ruins, a testament to the unpredictable nature of life. But in its wake, it left lessons about trust, forgiveness, and the strength it takes to move on. Our story, though marred by pain and betrayal, was a chapter in the book of life. A chapter that had ended, allowing for a new beginning, a fresh start. And as I turned the page, I carried with me the lessons learned, the scars healed, and the hope for a better tomorrow. Life, it seemed, had no intention of slowing down its relentless march. While June grappled with the consequences of her actions, my own life was taking a different turn. My new relationship, unexpected and gentle, began to bloom amidst the ruins of my past. June, meanwhile, faced a harsh reality. Financial instability, a direct result of her impulsive decisions, led to the threat of eviction. Watching from a distance, I saw the news hit her like a physical blow. The once proud and confident woman I knew was now on the brink of losing everything. In a desperate bid to sustain herself, she resorted to drastic measures. It pained me to hear of the lengths she was going to just to keep a roof over her head. Rumors and gossip about her actions spread through the community like wildfire, each tale more sensational than the last. Her health, already fragile, reached a critical point. News of her hospitalization reached me through hushed whispers and concerned glances. Despite everything, a part of me ached at the thought of her suffering alone. Amidst the whirlwind of my evolving life, I found myself at a crossroads. The conflict of whether to help my ex-wife, the mother of my child, weighed heavily on me. It was a battle between my sense of duty and the scars of betrayal. June's last-ditch effort to win back her family was heart-wrenching. She reached out, her pleas filled with desperation and remorse. But the chasm between us was too wide, the damage too deep. I stood at the precipice of a decision that would define my future. The weight of the choice was immense, a balancing act between the past and the possibility of a new beginning. The conclusion of June's story was a stark reminder of the consequences of choices. Her downfall, a direct result of her actions, was a tragic end to a tale that had begun with so much promise. As I reflected on the journey, the lessons learned were clear and harsh. The consequences of infidelity, the fragility of trust, and the strength required to rebuild from the ashes of betrayal were starkly evident. In the end, the story was not just about the end of a marriage, but about the resilience of the human spirit, the complexities of relationships, and the often harsh realities of life's choices. June's eviction became a reality, a final blow in a series of misfortunes. I heard about her moving out, the last remnants of her life packed into boxes, a visual metaphor for the disintegration of her world. As I navigated my new relationship, the contrast between my life and June's couldn't have been starker. Where my life was gaining color and warmth, hers was descending into bleakness. My new partner brought stability and a quiet joy, a stark contrast to the tumultuous years with June. The community's whispers about June turned into loud chatter. Tales of her struggles were recounted with a mix of pity and morbid fascination. The woman who had once been a part of our social fabric was now a cautionary tale, a subject of town gossip. Her health deteriorated rapidly, hospital visits became frequent, and I received updates from mutual acquaintances. The vibrant woman I had once known was now fighting a battle against her own body, a struggle that seemed increasingly futile. The conflict within me grew. Despite the pain and betrayal, she was still the mother of my child, a woman I had once loved deeply. But the wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too deep for me to cross the chasm that lay between us. Her attempt to reconnect with our family was a scene of desperation. She stood on our doorstep one evening, a shadow of her former self, pleading for a chance to be part of our lives again. It was a moment of intense emotion, a clash of past love and present reality. My decision about the future was one of the hardest I've ever had to make. I chose to move forward, to embrace the potential of a new life, a decision that meant closing the door on the past on June. Her downfall was a result of a series of choices, each one leading her further down a path of destruction. The consequences of her actions were now her reality, a life vastly different from the one she had envisioned. As the chapter of our lives together closed, I reflected on the journey. The pain, the betrayal, and the eventual healing taught me about the complexity of love and the harsh realities of life. The story was a testament to the consequences of infidelity, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the resilience required to move on. In the end, the narrative of our lives was a blend of joy and sorrow, love and loss, a reminder that the choices we make have far-reaching consequences. It was a story of coming to terms with the past and embracing the future, a journey of healing